Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, ForbesWomen editor, Maggie McGrath. Maggie, thanks for coming in, and a big congrats to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so funny to be on this side of the interview stage.
I know, it's nice to have you in person. It's nice for both of us to be in here at the same time, and we're in here for a big reason. The 50 over 50 list has officially launched. So before we dive into it, give us the inspiration behind the list.
The 50 over 50 is our list of women who are stepping into their power in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. We have someone on this year's list who's 102. I really want to make sure we get to her because she has some great advice. But essentially, the inspiration came from Mika Brzezinski, the MSNBC co-host of Morning Joe and the founder of the Know Your Value initiative. She entered her 50s and was realizing that she had more energy and more ideas than ever before, and talked to our chief content officer 4 or 5 years ago, Randall Lane, and together they thought, hey, there could be a list in here. And indeed, there is. In the same way that the 30 under 30 identifies young change makers, the 50 over 50 identifies women who may have had one career doing one thing, and then they hit the second part of their life and they're like, actually, no, I want to start a company, or I want to start a VC fund, or I want to become a philanthropist and give away billions of dollars. So these women are really changing society, or they're changing their sector that they work in. And I would hope that they're changing the way we think about aging in America.
Well, they definitely are for me, and I know I've told you this before, but this list is one of my favorites here at Forbes because it shows you that life's not over after you hit 30 or 40, even 50, and even you can be a change maker in your 100s, as the list shows. But give us an overview of this year's list.
So as we've done for the past few years, we have 4 different categories on this year's list. We have impact, investment, innovation, and lifestyle. Now, those are obviously very broad categories, and some people bridge both categories, like some of our fintech founders. We were, in the days leading up to the list launch, still debating, should this founder be on the innovation list or the investment list? So we have dozens of subsectors represented across this list. And essentially the reason we do that is so we can give a really diverse and representative sample of where women are working and making a difference in society. So we have architects, we have print artists, we have sculpture artists, we have founders of biotech companies, CEOs of biotech companies, we have biologists, we have coaches of NCAA winning teams and Philadelphia heroes. We have, I mean, you name it, the type of work, the type of leadership, it exists on this list.
So let's dive into the list, because you also have people who are in the political world, and you know that's where a lot of my conversations come from. So let's start there. When it comes to politics, who are some of the notable names who made this year's list?
So I'm going to start with Cindy McCain. She is now the head of the UN's World Food Program, and you know, she is someone who, after the death of her husband, Senator John McCain, really had to forge a life for herself in her own name, but also thinking about preserving his legacy. But she's been a tremendously influential voice about food insecurity, about calling out the humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now. So she is on this year's impact list. We have Valerie Jarrett, the CEO of the Obama Foundation. She was nominated for the list by her daughter, Laura. And of course, she was known as one of former President Obama's most critical support systems. And you know, that's evident by the fact that he appointed her to be CEO of the Obama Foundation after he left office. And then we have Cecile Richards, the former president of Planned Parenthood. She is the co-founder of Charlie. It's a chatbot that helps connect women across the country, and especially in states where they might have trouble accessing certain reproductive healthcare services, find and access those healthcare services. And then across the list, we have a few people who have founded organizations or are leading organizations, really helping voter engagement, which of course, it's an election year. So anyone who is helping more people use their voice, I think are worth highlighting.
Critically important work. But you did mention that the oldest woman on the list is 102 years old. Who is she and what's her story?
Deborah Saleh is 102 years old, and she is the co-founder of something called Rancho La Puerta. It is a wellness resort, and we see a lot of wellness offerings in the market today in 2024, but she was a pioneer. She co-founded this in 1950, and she still continues to work and to lead this organization, and they founded a second one, and she's really known as a pioneer in the wellness industry. But we also asked everyone on the list, what's your advice for women under the age of 50 or women in their 20s and 30s? To your point earlier, this list can give a lot of inspiration to folks who feel a lot of pressure to get a lot done before the age of 30 or 40 or any deadline that's in your head. And when asked any piece of advice, we kept it broad, and she said, don't marry before the age of 30. She would go back and tell her younger self that, because she eventually got a divorce from her husband, and she experienced that. But her point is, there are scientific studies that show that our brains are still developing in our 20s, and what is more important than getting to know yourself? So there's a lot of wisdom in this list, and I think that's one that I'm taking to heart.
Talk to us a little bit more about that wisdom in this list, because every story is more inspiring after the next. So how are they inspiring the next few generations of women?
I think about some of the people that we photographed, and actually you can go on Forbes.com or our YouTube channel to see some of these interviews. Some are literally teaching the next generation, right? We have Coach Dawn Staley. She is the head coach of the University of South Carolina Gamecocks. Obviously, they won the NCAA championship in the women's tournament this year. And she was also a Hall of Fame player, literally is in the Hall of Fame for her time as a point guard. But she said to me that coaching is her calling. It's her second skin. She really feels like she can communicate with these players and infuse them with a practice of excellence and discipline, and she's exactly where she needs to be. And so that's someone who is literally informing the next generation. You have people like Ava DuVernay, the filmmaker, the director, the writer. She is a storyteller at heart. We talked to her for this list, and I have a story coming out later this week on her work, because she's building new models of funding for movies. She has her own production company and creative campus. She talked to me about cinema segregation. Not every community has easy access to a movie theater. So through her production company, through this creative campus, she is showing films, screening films, and that's inspiring the next generation. And then Melinda French Gates, who we know earlier this year announced a $1 billion commitment to gender equity, and she is also on this list, has allocated some of that money and said, hey, Ava, help me figure out who should receive this money. So Ava has effectively $20 million to distribute to activists and organizations who are seeking to create change in society. So Ava DuVernay, in our view, sits as someone who really stands. She has made positive change through the glass ceilings that she has broken, but also she stands to make a lot more given both her work in film and the money that she's going to help Melinda distribute.
When you're poring over all of these stories from all of these women on this list, what are the common trends or themes that you're seeing?
It's amazing how many broadly say that age really is their advantage. I do have a few tough conversations with publicists who say we don't want the public to know our CEO's age because we're afraid they'll call for her retirement. But those conversations are in the minority. Broadly speaking, everyone is telling us, telling our team, telling Mika that the experience that you get, even the failures, you learn from those moments, and that's fueling scientific discoveries, it's fueling philanthropic giving. It is really the secret to a lot of this work, I think.
It is not your first rodeo when it comes to the 50 over 50 list. You have done this now for a couple of years. What surprised you most about this year's list, and how does it differ from lists in the past?
This is the fourth annual 50 over 50. I think what's interesting is the number of people who still don't know that it exists. So I love to hear from people who say, oh my God, this is a great thing. I think something that isn't different year over year, but is nonetheless hard every year, is that through the founders we talk to and through the investors we talk to, I see the pay gap, wage gap, wealth gap, funding gap in real time, right? We ask companies, how much money have you raised? What's your revenue? Where is your funding coming from? And we get stories from people who even today in 2024, are still having trouble raising money. And the money that they have raised is outperforming their female peers. And so we talk about these statistics in the women's space in ForbesWomen about, 2% of all venture funding goes to women, even less go to founders who are women and women of color. And I think as I look at the 50 over 50 and the applications that come in, the nominations that come in, you kind of see that funding gap in real time, because you see an ag tech company that's really promising, and then you might look at across the ag tech space and see a male co-founded company that has a little more money. So that's something that we have to take off our institutional bias that usually looks at, okay, what are the biggest numbers? And of course, we're looking for big monies. We're looking for substantial proof that this is a business at scale. But I also think that it's important to remember the landscape that we're in and look at everything holistically.
Since you've been doing this list now for 4 years, is there any hope when it comes to that funding gap? Are you seeing it close, at least shorten? What does that look like?
I was just editing a bio earlier this week, because of course I am nothing if not a deadline junkie and will take every last moment to make every final tweak. And it was a founder of a fintech company who is a Black woman, and she has raised $30 million. She has Chris Paul and Kevin Durant as angel investors in her fund, or in her company, and she is just one story. But I just referenced the racial gap in funding, right? So when I see stories like this, when I see women like Tanya Van Court of Goal Setter, that is who I'm talking about here, I'm so used to not being able to say their names that I'm telling everyone under embargo until August 1st. When I see that level of funding and that level of attraction within angel investors and institutional investors, that gives me hope.
I know that we went through a bunch of stories here, but are there any other inspiring stories you want to share with us today?
There are so many themes that emerged over the course of this list, and I want to call out two kind of sector themes. Obviously, we're speaking during the Olympics, and I referenced Dawn Staley earlier. We are seeing this tremendous moment for women in sports. It's like everyone woke up and realized that women can play sports too. And I talked to Dawn Staley about this, but we also have on this list Val Ackerman, the head of Big East, the commissioner for Big East. We have Doris Burke, the NBA analyst who's broken glass ceilings in her work. And we have Michelle Kang. And she, a few years ago, became the first woman of color to own a stake in a national professional women's soccer league, and she has since acquired stake in Olympique Lyonnais and the London City Lionesses, and earlier this week she announced a new investment in women's sports. And she's someone who was a founder of a biotech company and is now at 65 really seeking to pour her funds and her influence behind building equity in sport, because she has also said it's about creating equal opportunity for genders. It's, lifting up women, but also making sure that men see that investment. So that's one theme we have. And those were the people who made the list. There were others that we considered who are breaking ground across athletics who didn't make this year's list, but there's always next year. The other big theme that I see, and maybe it's just my bias as someone who cares about women's healthcare, we always see a lot of healthcare founders, biotech founders, and CEOs, because women actually make up about 2/3 of the global workforce in healthcare and social care giving jobs. There are some scientists and physician scientists on this year's list whose work is really changing tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives. We have Akiko Iwasaki. She is an immunobiologist at Yale, and so she has long been an expert on the human immune system, but she is applying that knowledge and research to long COVID. And long COVID affects 65 million people around the world, and there's still so much we don't know about it. And even she has said there's still so much to learn, but we're beginning to find out more data and more information, which is leading to better treatment. We have also in the physician scientist space, Stacy Tesler-Lindow. She is building what is in short a bionic breast. It is a sensor. She's working with doctors, but also engineers, biomedical engineers, to build an implantable device that you can give to patients who have had a mastectomy or breast reconstruction that will enable them to feel skin contact, because she has long been in the space of sexual healing and sexual health after cancer. So making sure people can regain their lives as best they can after, what is sometimes devastating treatment for these diseases. So, and she heard from some of these patients saying they missed the warmth of a hug after they had some of these surgeries. So she's building these sensors. She has funding from the NIH, and says that these sensors could have applications not just for breast cancer, but in other parts of the body or for other surgeries. So those are two healthcare stories I wanted to call out, because of course it's important to found companies and discover drugs, but it's also important to be uncovering the science that leads to so many of these cures.
I mean, what you're just saying, there's so many impactful stories across so many industries, and there's many more in the full list. And I know I've asked you this before, but I'm going to ask you it for this year's list. If you could break down and describe this list, the 2024 one, in one word, what would it be?
Defiant.
Maggie McGrath, defiant it is. Thank you so much for joining me today, and everyone can check out the list at Forbes.
Yes, head to Forbes.com, 50 over 50.